Daniel Hayes had fixed countless engines, but nothing rattled him like the scene outside the minimart that night. His daughter Emma stood trembling beside the soda machine while three wealthy college boys closed in, smirking, until Daniel stepped forward. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. Daniel Hayes only meant to be inside for 2 minutes. Just enough time to pay for milk and cereal before getting his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, home for dinner. But when he stepped back into the neon glow of the minimart parking lot, his heart slammed into his ribs. Emma stood frozen beside the soda machine, and three college boys had her cornered. They were the kind Daniel recognized instantly, wealthy, bored, and convinced the world was theirs. One brushed a hand over Emma's hair like she was a puppy. Another nudged her backpack with his spotless sneaker. The tallest one leaned in close, blocking her path. "Relax, sweetheart," he said. "We're just talking." Emma's wide eyes shot to Daniel. Daniel walked toward them, slow and steady. "Step away from my daughter." The tallest boy's smirk twitched. He looked Daniel up and down, the worn boots, the oil-stained jacket, the tired face of a man who worked too hard for too little. "You the mechanic?" he asked. "Dalton Auto? Cute little shop. My dad said it smells like poverty." His friend snickered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I won't say it again. Move." Instead, the third boy reached for Emma's cheek. Daniel grabbed his wrist mid-air and shoved him back. Not hard, just enough to send the kid stumbling. The laughter died instantly. "You just messed up," the tallest boy hissed. "You have no idea who my father is." The clerk inside yelled, "Hey! I'm calling the cops." The boys flinched. Pride cracked. They backed toward their car. "You're finished," the leader said before slamming the door. The headlights flashed across Daniel and Emma as the car tore away. Emma ran into his side, trembling. "Dad. I was scared." Daniel held her tight. "I know, honey. I'm here." But as he drove home, her small hand gripping his sleeve, one truth gnawed at him. Boys like that always had fathers who made trouble disappear. Men like Daniel didn't. Daniel barely slept. Every creak of the old apartment made him jolt up, thinking someone had come to make good on the boy's threat. Emma slept curled against him, hands still gripping his shirt even in her dreams. At dawn, he opened the garage like always. The small building smelled of oil and bitter coffee. Emma sat in the office corner drawing, humming quietly. Daniel tried to lose himself in a brake job, but every time a car rumbled outside, he glanced toward the open bay door. 10 a.m. A sound rose outside, not one engine, but several. Low, polished, expensive. Emma looked up. "Dad, there are a lot of cars." Daniel stepped into the doorway. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into his cracked parking lot, followed by a sleek silver sedan. All tinted windows. All idling in perfect sync. The kind of vehicles he only touched when someone rich needed an emergency fix. His breath caught. Retaliation. Lawsuit. Ruin. Emma slipped her small hand into his. "Is it the boys again?" "Go into the office, honey," Daniel murmured. "Stay where I can see you." The first SUV door opened. Daniel braced himself. But the man who stepped out wasn't a college kid. He was in his late 50s, tall, sharp suit, steel gray hair, someone who belonged on magazine covers, not on cracked pavement. Behind him stood two security men. And from the silver sedan emerged the tall boy from the minimart, head down now, not smirking. Daniel's stomach dropped. The man approached, stopping a few feet away. "Mr. Hayes?" he asked. Daniel wiped his hands on his rag, heart pounding. "That's me. The man extended a hand. "I'm Jonathan Mercer," he said calmly. "We need to talk about my son." Daniel swallowed. This was it. The consequences had finally arrived. Jonathan Mercer's handshake was firm, businesslike, the kind Daniel usually saw on TV when wealthy men announced mergers. Up close, his expression was unreadable, not angry, not apologetic, just focused. Daniel braced himself. "If this is about last night, sir, I protected my daughter. I won't apologize for that." Jonathan glanced back at his son, Blake, the same arrogant kid who had cornered Emma. Now Blake couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "You laid a hand on my boy," Jonathan said. Daniel straightened. "I pushed him away from my daughter. He wouldn't stop touching her." A long silence stretched across the garage. Then Jonathan exhaled. "Good." Daniel blinked. "What?" Jonathan's tone hardened as he looked at Blake. "That's what a man does. Protects. Stands up. Not whatever stupidity you displayed last night." Blake flushed, jaw clenching. Jonathan turned back to Daniel. "I received the security footage from the minimart. I saw everything." Daniel felt the ground shift under him. "I came here," Jonathan continued, "to apologize for my son's behavior, to you and your daughter." Daniel stared. Apologies were not what he'd expected from a billionaire. "And," Jonathan added, "to tell you that Blake will perform mandatory community service for the next 3 months. He will personally apologize to Emma as well." Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "But there's more," Jonathan said. He stepped past Daniel, surveying the garage, the cracked floor, the aging tools, the lonely lift that squeaked when used. "You run this place alone?" "For now," Daniel said cautiously. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "You're honest. Steady. People like you are rare." Daniel frowned. "Sir, what exactly are you saying?" Jonathan clasped his hands behind his back. "I want you to become an official service partner with Mercer Automotive Group," he said. "Full renovation. Staff. Salary increase. Revenue share." Daniel felt the world tilt. "What? Why me?" Jonathan's gaze was steady. "Because," he said, "last night showed me the kind of man you are, the kind I want representing my name." From the office window, Emma watched her dad, eyes wide. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't know whether to breathe, or wake himself from a dream. Daniel stood frozen, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Offers like this didn't come to men who spent their days under lifted trucks and their nights helping with homework at a kitchen table missing 2 chairs. "Mr. Mercer," he said slowly, "I'm just a small mechanic. You don't need someone like me." Jonathan's expression didn't change. "I need someone exactly like you." He walked deeper into the garage, touching a set of worn wrenches, examining a half-dismantled engine as if assessing the soul of the place. The security men stayed by the SUVs, while Blake lingered, shoulders hunched. "You built this business from nothing," Jonathan said. "You raised a daughter alone. And you still chose decency when my son chose arrogance. That matters." Daniel felt heat rise up his neck. Compliments weren't something he was used to, not ones like this. "My company needs honest partners," Jonathan continued. "Real mechanics. Not glossy dealerships pretending to care." Daniel swallowed hard. "This is a lot." Jonathan nodded. "I know. That's why I'm giving you time to think." He took out a card and set it on Daniel's tool bench. "Tonight. My downtown headquarters. I want you and Emma there. We'll discuss details." "Emma too?" Daniel asked, surprised. "You protect her," Jonathan said softly. "I want her to see what comes from that." Before Daniel could respond, Blake stepped forward, head bowed, voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Hayes. I'm sorry. For everything." Daniel looked at him. Really looked. The kid's voice trembled. This wasn't a rehearsed apology, it was shame. Daniel nodded once. "Thank you." Blake exhaled like he'd been holding that breath forever. Jonathan clapped his son on the shoulder. "Now get back in the car." As the convoy prepared to leave, Jonathan paused at the door. "Daniel," he said, meeting his eyes, "not every man would stand up to 3 boys twice his size. Remember that." The engines roared to life and rolled away. Daniel stood alone in the sudden quiet, card in hand, heart pounding, Emma peeking through the office window with a mix of fear and hope. For the first time in forever, the future didn't look like survival. It looked like possibility. Daniel stared at the business card long after the SUVs disappeared. Part of him felt electric, the other part terrified. Offers from powerful men usually came with strings attached. And he'd spent his whole life avoiding strings. Emma stepped out of the office, clutching her drawing. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Daniel knelt, brushing hair from her face. "No, honey. I think someone finally noticed we've been trying our best." Emma studied the shiny card in his hand. "Do we really have to go downtown?" Daniel nodded. "It's important." Hours later, after closing the garage early, they boarded the train to the city. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching skyscrapers rise like giants. Daniel hadn't been downtown in months, parking was too expensive, and most people there treated men like him as invisible. But when they stepped into the Mercer Tower lobby, heads actually turned. Not rudely, curiously. Daniel felt wildly out of place in his cleanest work shirt, while Emma held his hand tightly, her backpack bouncing against her side. A receptionist approached. "Mr. Hayes? Mr. Mercer is expecting you. Please follow me." They were led into a private elevator that rose so smoothly it felt like floating. Emma squeezed his hand nervously. "Dad, what if they don't like me?" Daniel smiled. "Then we leave. Simple as that." The doors opened onto a stunning conference level of glass walls, city lights, and polished floors. Jonathan Mercer waited by the window, hands clasped behind him. "Daniel. Emma. I'm glad you came." Emma hid slightly behind Daniel, whispering, "He's really tall." Jonathan knelt to Emma's level, surprising both of them. "Emma, your father is a brave man," he said gently. "And I want to show him what bravery can build." Emma blinked, then whispered back, "He is brave." Daniel's throat tightened. Jonathan stood and gestured to the conference table. "Let's talk about your future," he said. And for the first time, Daniel wondered if this might be more than kindness. Maybe it was a turning point. Daniel sat stiffly at the long conference table, feeling like a man who had accidentally walked into someone else's life. Emma swung her legs nervously beside him, her backpack resting on her lap like a shield. Jonathan Mercer placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Daniel. Inside were printed plans, architectural sketches of Daniel's small garage, but transformed. Enlarged bays. New lifts. A reception area. Staff. Mr. Mercer. "I can't afford any of this," Daniel said. Jonathan shook his head. "You're not buying it. I'm investing in you. I want Hayes Auto to become the flagship independent partner in Mercer Automotive Group." Daniel blinked. "Why? You have dozens of shops already." Jonathan walked to the window overlooking the glowing city. "Most men want to impress me. You stood up to my son knowing it could cost you everything. That tells me exactly the kind of partner you'd be." Daniel stared at the papers again, numbers so large they didn't feel real. "There would be expectations," Jonathan continued. "Quality. Fair prices. Integrity. Your name stays on the building. Your independence stays intact. You simply gain the resources to grow. Daniel's fingers tightened. This feels too generous. Jonathan looked him squarely in the eye. Good men rarely get what they deserve. I'm correcting that. Emma leaned closer to Daniel. Dad, it looks really nice. He let out a shaky breath. It does. Jonathan sat down again. You don't need to decide today. But I wanted you to see what your life could be. Something softened in his expression. And Emma's. Daniel swallowed hard. He'd spent years patching together life with duct tape and grit. No safety net. No favors. No miracles. Now a door stood open, wide, bright, terrifying. He lifted his eyes. What happens if I say yes? He asked. Jonathan smiled. Then, Daniel, your life changes. Daniel didn't speak for a long moment. The quiet in the glass-walled room felt heavier than any engine he'd ever lifted. Emma fidgeted beside him, her small hand inching toward his. Jonathan gave him space, simply watching the city lights pulse below them. Finally, Emma tugged Daniel's sleeve and whispered, Dad, are we gonna be rich? The question hit Daniel harder than any insult the boys had thrown. He crouched beside her chair, looking into her wide, hopeful eyes. No, honey, he said softly. Money isn't what makes us okay. But, maybe life won't be so hard anymore. Emma nodded like she understood in the way only children do, simply trusting him. When Daniel sat back up, Jonathan leaned forward. Let me show you something else. From a side table, he picked up a tablet and tapped it. Security footage appeared, the Minimart parking lot from the night before. Daniel, standing between the boys and Emma. Emma hiding behind his arm. Blake stepping forward, arrogance dripping. Daniel's stomach tightened. I didn't ask to see this, he said quietly. Jonathan nodded. I know. But I want you to understand something. He pointed at the screen. This is what integrity looks like. You didn't know anyone was watching. That's why it matters. Daniel looked away, uncomfortable. I just did what any father would. Jonathan's voice lowered. You'd be surprised how many wouldn't. Silence stretched. Then Jonathan turned off the screen. If you join us, Daniel, you won't just be fixing cars. You'll be setting an example for my employees, especially my son. Daniel glanced at the elevator where Blake had stood earlier, ashamed and shaken. Jonathan continued, Blake has grown up surrounded by privilege, not principles. I can correct that. But he needs men like you in his orbit. Daniel exhaled slowly. I'm just a mechanic. No, Jonathan said firmly. You're the man I want my son to learn from. Emma squeezed Daniel's hand. And for the first time, Daniel wondered if this offer wasn't about business at all, but about something far deeper. Jonathan stood and walked toward a smaller adjoining office. There's one more thing I need to know before we go any further, he said. A question only you can answer. Daniel felt his shoulders stiffen. All right. Jonathan opened a drawer and pulled out a slim envelope. He placed it on the table between them. Inside is the preliminary partnership contract, he said. Nothing binding, just a draft. Before I show you, I need to know the truth about something. Daniel's pulse kicked. Go ahead. Jonathan folded his hands. Most men, after what Blake did, would take this offer out of anger. To win. To prove something. Others would take it for the money. The status. The safety. He looked Daniel directly in the eyes. Why would you take it? The room fell quiet. Emma leaned closer, sensing the weight of the question. Daniel wasn't used to explaining himself. Most days he kept his head down, hands dirty, bills stacked on the counter, doing his best to raise a daughter without slipping. He took a breath. "I'd take it," he said slowly, "because Emma deserves a life that isn't built on fear. Whether it's fear of rich kids, or fear of overdue bills." Jonathan didn't blink. "And?" Daniel exhaled. "Because I want to give her a childhood she doesn't have to recover from." Emma's hand tightened around his. Jonathan sat back, studying him. Something in his expression softened, a rare, quiet relief. "That," he said, "is exactly the answer I hoped for." He slid the envelope across the table. "Then you're ready to see this." Daniel hesitated before opening it. Inside were printed pages and a simple handwritten note. "A better future begins with one honest man. J.M." Daniel swallowed hard. Jonathan nodded toward the doors. "Before we finalize anything, there's someone else who wants to speak to you." Daniel stiffened. "Who?" Jonathan gave a small, knowing smile. "My son," he said. "Blake asked to talk to you alone." Daniel's stomach tightened. Emma whispered, "Dad, are you scared?" "A little," he admitted. But he stood anyway. Because the man he wanted his daughter to see, was brave. Jonathan opened a side door, revealing a small lounge overlooking the city. Blake stood inside alone, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders tense. Gone was the arrogance from the mini-mart. This was a kid who looked like he'd been forced to meet his own reflection for the first time. Daniel stepped in, leaving Emma with Jonathan. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Blake swallowed hard. "My dad didn't make me ask for this. I wanted to." Daniel crossed his arms, guarded. "All right. Then say what you came to say." Blake paced once, then stopped, rubbing his jaw. "Last night, I acted like an idiot. Worse than that. I scared your daughter. I disrespected you. And I don't have an excuse." Daniel didn't let him off easily. "No. You don't." Blake nodded, accepting it. "My friends, they egged me on. I wanted to look cool. That's the truth." Daniel's voice stayed steady. "Being cool doesn't mean being cruel." Blake's eyes flicked up, glassy with frustration, not at Daniel, but at himself. "I know. And I've been thinking all day about how I'd feel if someone treated my little sister like that." He took a shaky breath. "It makes me sick." Daniel felt the tension in his chest shift, not softening, but listening. Blake continued, "My dad, he's always told me that Mercer men build things. Protect things. But I've been acting like everything was just handed to me. Like people were props in my life." Another breath. Then he looked Daniel straight in the eye. "I want to do better. I want to be better. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm not the jerk who cornered your daughter." Daniel stepped closer, studying him. Most grown men never owned their actions this honestly. Finally, Daniel spoke quietly. "If you want to be better, then start by showing it. Not to me. To her." Blake nodded firmly. "I will." Daniel turned toward the door, then paused. "And Blake?" "Yeah." Daniel met his gaze. "Being a man isn't about who your father is. It's about who you choose to be." Blake nodded again, this time with something like resolve. For the first time, Daniel believed him. Daniel returned to the conference room to find Emma chatting shyly with Jonathan. She brightened the moment she saw him. "Dad? Did it go okay?" Daniel ruffled her hair. "Yeah, honey. I think it did." Jonathan approached with calm certainty. "So, Daniel, have you made your decision?" Daniel looked down at his calloused hands, the same hands that had rebuilt engines, changed tires in blizzards, held Emma steady when the world felt unsafe. And now, they held a future he never imagined he'd touch. He glanced at Emma. She nodded, trusting him completely. He turned to Jonathan. "I'm in. Let's do this." Jonathan's smile wasn't triumphant, it was relieved. "Good. I believe this partnership will help more than just my company." Before they could continue, the elevator dinged. Blake stepped out, hesitating, then approached Emma. "Emma," he began, voice low. "I'm really sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong. I'll do my community service, and I'll stay away unless you want otherwise." Emma blinked, surprised. "It's okay," she said softly. "Just don't be mean again." Blake nodded quickly. "Never." Jonathan placed a hand on his son's shoulder, proud but restrained. "One step at a time, Blake." Daniel extended a hand. "Thank you for saying that." Blake shook it, firmly this time, not with arrogance, but respect. Moments later, they walked toward the private elevator. Jonathan escorted them to the lobby, where polished floors reflected their small group like a mirror of the new life waiting outside. When the revolving doors opened, cold Chicago air swept in. Emma slipped her tiny hand into Daniel's. "Dad, does this mean things are gonna be better now?" Daniel looked down at her, his whole world in one pair of bright eyes. "Yeah, Em," he said softly. "It means we finally get a chance." Outside, a city that once felt too big and too harsh suddenly looked different, not easier, but full of possibility. And as Daniel and Emma stepped into the night, the headlights of the waiting sedan lit their path forward. Everything had changed. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.